Hey guys, in this video my very first attempt in repairing this beautiful slot 1 motherboard. It's from Asus. It is the P3B-F revision 1.04 for slot 1 with the famous Intel 440BX chipset. It's in pretty nice condition, and after washing it, it looks like brand new. The only issue are the ports. There is a lot of corrosion, so I'm gonna attempt to desolder the old ones and put in some new ones. I did think about replacing the capacitors, but it seems there are Japanese capacitors on this motherboard and they all look in great shape, and as you will see in the video, things didn't quite go as smoothly, so I might be back in the future with more knowledge, better equipment to replace those capacitors. I was quietly optimistic going into this project. I've done a lot of soldering recently with interesting solder kits like this one, a Tetris game, a calculator, FM radio and others. But working with this motherboard, well, it quickly humbled me. Multi-layer PCB with large ground planes and lead-free solder. Yeah, it's not as easy, but look, you have to give it a go, otherwise you will not gain the experience. So yeah, let's check it out. I will also be evaluating 3 desoldering utilities that are purchased. The good old manual solder sucker. Then we've got one that combines a solder iron with a manual solder sucker. And then we've got the semi-automatic version. This video is brought to you by PCBWay, our channel sponsor, your one-stop shop for printed circuit boards manufacturing and assembly, but also CNC machining, 3D printing and more. Check the video description for links and more information. Here we go. So this is the first pin that I'm trying to desolder. This is from the PS2 port. And yeah, in hindsight, the desoldering tool, it needs a lot more time to warm up, over 10 minutes. I plugged it into a power meter and it never seems to switch off, so it's constantly showing a power consumption of 30 watts. So if you buy one of these, leave it plugged in for 10-15 minutes to get the temperature up to the right level. And here I'm doing the second pin. And yeah, both of them, they seem to be desoldering just fine. At the moment, I'm not using any flux, no preheating. I didn't apply any fresh solder. And even with this very basic tool, it seems to be doing an okay job. But again, you can see on this leg, yeah, it definitely needs a few goes. So what I'm trying to do is, yeah, stay on top, give it plenty of heat, and then I wiggle around a little bit. I want to hear that pin moving freely, and then I press the button on the plunger to suck out the solder. But yeah, like I said, it looks like I didn't let it heat up all the way. And the 30 watts of power, I've got a photo here of the power meter. It's not that high, so just keep that in mind. It's a very basic utility, and later in the video we will try different desoldering techniques, and then at the end I'll give you some ideas of what worked and what didn't work. I'm moving on from that pin at the bottom, sort of come back to it at a later time, and I'm attacking one of these 4 pins. So the important pins are those 6 pins you're looking at right here. So those connect directly to the PS2 ports. 2 of the pins have no contact. One is ground, one is plus 5 volt. Another one is data and one is sync. And what I'm noticing is the size of the pins. So 5 of the pins are quite large, but at the bottom right, you can see one is a lot smaller, and this will be a pain in the neck, as we will find out shortly. So here I'm heating up the pad, and then this is a manual solder sucker, so you need to arm it and then press the button on the side. And once it's heated up and you're dealing with data pins or sync pins that are not connected to ground or voltage, it seems to be doing a pretty solid job. And now we're getting to the difficult part. So it turns out that this little pin is connected to ground, and I continue to struggle. So the 30 watts of power, they are just not enough. I haven't preheated the board. So this is a ground pin, and we're dealing with a multi-layer PCB board. So the way I've been reading up on this, basically it's acting like a huge heat sink. It's pulling all the heat away and making the job of desoldering really difficult. So I keep trying with this equipment, but it's just not working well. So we will come back to this pin a little bit later, trying some other techniques. And here I'm attacking the second PS2 port. So this port, it's connecting to the PS2 port at the top, which is for the mouse. The one on the right side is for the keyboard. And that's important because, well, later when I'm testing the whole board, something doesn't work. So if you see any mistake, if you notice anything that went wrong, personally, I couldn't see anything that's off. Yeah, in the end, it's a little bit messy, but most aspects later testing just fine. So I'm not quite sure what happened. This pin also comes out fine. Give it plenty of heat. Wiggle the pin so I can hear it sort of moving around, and then press the button to suck out the solder. So it's working pretty well. It's just not up to scratch for those ground pins. Here we need more power. We need to preheat the board. We want to use flux and maybe apply some fresh solder. This pin is also coming out really easily. And then I'm having a go at these huge pins. And I don't think these are too important. Maybe they're connected to ground, but they're mostly to give the port stability. So yeah, it's a little bit awkward because the tip doesn't really fit over both of these pins. So this has two little pins. Well, they're not little, they're huge actually. So later I will try a different tip, but this might be easier using some solder wick. And here we go, another ground pin, and just like before, it's a struggle. There's just not enough power there, and without the preheating, without flux, without applying some fresh solder, we just don't have any chance. It's just not going to happen. Here I'm working on the USB port, and I'm having some luck with those larger pins, sort of just getting it in there and sucking out some of the solder. But it's a lot of solder, and the power output, again, we're limited, so it takes quite a while to heat it up and get that old solder flowing. But yeah, most of these pins are actually coming out, so you just have to be patient, let it sit on there, and you can see now that the solder is starting to flow, and then I'm hitting the trigger and sucking out the solder. Just like before, the USB ports here, they're coming out just fine. These are data voltage ports. The hard ones are those two little ones. I'm actually curious why the ground pins seem to... Actually, are they smaller? They might not be smaller at all. They just look different. If you know what's going on there, let me know. So maybe that's just... Yeah, I'm not quite sure. It's a visual cue or whatever. But the ground pins, they don't have that dark coloring around them. So again, we can see those pins are coming out quite easily. And here we go. We are back attacking another one of these ground pins, and the story isn't getting any better with this tool. It's just not going to happen. Here we are back working on the PS2 port and applied some flux. So flux gets rid or counteracts oxidation. The solder wants to flow towards the heat, but without any flux, it can't because of oxidation, and that's what flux does. It removes oxidation and helps the solder to flow. And we are now using the semi-automatic solder sucker. So this one has a higher power rating, 40 watts. So I've got a photo here of the power meter. Slightly more power, but again, it's a struggle. I'm not preheating the board, but it seems to be working a little bit better than before. Here I'm attacking the ground pin of the USB port, and you can probably notice that the tip is wiggling around a little bit. And I noticed that when the equipment is cold, I really tightened it, but as soon as it heats up, it starts to get loose. So I probably should get a tool to be able to tighten it while it's hot. Here we are close up with the USB port. I'm wiggling it around, and you can see most of the pins are free. All of the pins are free apart from that ground pin. So we are very close to be able to get it out. So we're adding more flux. This was one of the tips I saw in most of my comments on the previous videos. Add more flux. If in doubt, add more flux. It will help you with the solder flowing better. So here we go. Flux is applied, 40 watts of power, and there you go. Yeah, it seems to have sucked out all the solder on the ground pin. And we can see it here. All the pins are now wiggling the ground pin a little bit. Well, actually hard to see. Maybe the ground pin is stuck, so let's use some brute force. There you go. I flipped over the board and with a screwdriver getting in there, and let's see if we can wiggle out that corroded USB port. It's almost there. But yeah, that ground pin is a little bit nasty, difficult to get out. Here we can see the USB port. All the pads seem to be there. So let's attack the PS2 port. I also had a go at the serial and COM ports. The serial and parallel ports. But later I gave up because they're not super critical, and I want to revisit this board with better equipment anyway. We are back fighting that PS2 port. I switched out the tip for one that's got, a wider hole, and this one seems to fit over those larger pins, and it's doing a good job sucking out that solder. This one is a bit hard. Those pins, the spacing is quite big, so you would need a really large tip to be able to cover that whole area. So I'm moving on to the other one, but that one is not much different. This one should be okay. It's got a slightly different spacing with the pins, so good job on that one. And here a small disaster. I'm not quite sure what happened, but look at that. Sort of the solder just totally exploded. Maybe it was backed up. Probably user error. Maybe I need to empty the chamber. Maybe there's some solder stuck, but yeah, it made a big mess, and definitely struggling to get rid of the solder in this hole. I'm trying this pin and having a little bit more luck. We're not getting the explosion like with the other one. The solder is now fluid. I'm wiggling around a little bit, and let's have a look. Boom, there you go. That one cleaned out nicely. Let's try some solder wick, or also called braid. And you mentioned add some flux on it. This will help. I'm having some difficulties with the syringe, and what I noticed when I put the syringe aside, the flux just kept oozing out. So again, user error. You need to pull out the what is it called, the thing at the back of the syringe to relieve some of the pressure. And yeah, this seems to be work quite well. So it's taking a while to heat up everything, but then we can see the solder is now flowing out from the joint and onto the solder wick. And I'm using the soldering iron now. So this one has 60 watts of power. It's quite a bit more than the soldering tools. And I'm also using a different tip. I think it's a 2.4D or 3.2D, one of those. And yeah, so the first side it seems to have gotten out most of the solder. And what I really like about this technique is that you have much more fine control. You can actually see what you're doing, and you can wiggle the pins, move them around a little bit. So for those large pins, maybe this is the way to go. Here I'm doing the wiggle test to see what's going on. Most of the pins are actually moving, but a few are not. So we need to keep fighting. Let's add a little bit of flux. Those are the two ground pins. They are just, really fighting us because of the issue with them sucking away all the heat. For the preheating, I played around with a hairdryer, but I don't think it made much of a difference. You can purchase preheating plates, but look, I've been told for the occasional desoldering, maybe that's overkill, but it is something I'm looking into. And now I'm trying the manual desoldering sucker. So I'm waiting here quite a long time to really get the heat into that ground pin. And yeah, didn't really do too much, but something did come out. Let's do the other one. So let's leave it on there for quite some time to try to get as much heat into that pin as possible. It's hard to see, but I can see the pin wiggling, and then here we go. Let's see. Yeah, we got definitely something out, but not nearly as neat as the other pins. Let's try some solder wick. I'm applying more flux. If in doubt, apply flux. That's what I got in the comments, so that's what we're doing. And here we go, brute force, just putting the wick on top of the joint and trying to get as much heat into that joint as possible. And it's very loose now. Most of the pins are moving. It looks like a mess. That PCB looks so dirty. So later I'm going to use some alcohol cleaning it up. But yeah, after wiggling it around, eventually it comes out. There you go. That's the PS2 port. Finally it's out. What a pain in the neck. So yeah, desoldering, it's really quite challenging with these older boards, multi-layer PCB, huge ground planes, and of course lead-free solder. And now for the fun part, let's put in some new ports. So this is a brand new PS2 port. You can buy these online, brand new, out of the factory. So let's solder them in. Here we go. This is from the other side. Let's zoom in a little bit more to see the detail. All the pins are showing through, but yeah, this looks like a battlefield, all solder everywhere, some burn marks. Really messy, not really happy with that job. And here we go. So this part is a lot more fun, heating the pad and the pin from one side and then feeding the solder from the other side. The solder I'm using is 6337 with usual the rosin flux core, and yeah, seems to be working just fine. I have a feeling that the wire is a little bit too thin. I think I'm using 0.5 or 0.6 millimeter. For this job, maybe a 0.8 would have been better. These pins are quite easy. They are huge, so I'm making sure I'm feeding plenty of solder to give that port mechanical stability. One more to go, and yeah, see how much solder I'm feeding to make sure everything is covered, and we can see the solder beautifully hardening from the liquid state. Now come the smaller pins. These are the important ones that transfer data, sync, but also ground and voltage. And yeah, have a close look. This is the port where the keyboard actually doesn't work after the repair. Everything else worked. USB worked. The PS2 mouse worked. But right here, one of these pins, something went wrong. And I'm not quite sure because I can see, well, this right here, maybe that's a cold solder joint. You could see the solder sort of getting, or also here the ground pin, we're having some issues. So maybe there's something going on there. Maybe it struggled to get enough heat into that joint. But one of these 6 pins, there's something that didn't work because that's the port for the keyboard. This one here is for the PS2 mouse, and that one is working without any issues. And yeah, with the microscope, this is a fairly easy job. Also, we can see a lot of oxidation with the solder tip, so that's something you mentioned. Keep it clean, but I'm not doing a good job with in this process. That's something I need to pay more attention. And basically the way I clean it is add some solder onto the tip, and then I've got one of these, what is it called? Those round braid balls, and you just dunk the solder tip in there. Here we've got the ground pin. Again, that looks like a cold solder joint, not enough heat in that pin. And here we are working on the USB port. So again, I'm starting with those huge pins first. Here it's struggling a little bit. So I'm trying again. Maybe I didn't make good contact. It's just struggling to really heat up that area. So I might have to put a little bit of solder directly on the tip like here, and now it's starting to flow. So yeah. And here I've zoomed into the data pins, and again, these should be fairly straightforward. And here we go, one of the ground pins. This one looked, well, a little bit average, maybe another cold solder joint, not enough power into that pin. These 2 pins are really straightforward, not much difficulty. And here is the last ground pin. Maybe I need to wait a little bit longer to make sure it's getting hot enough, but it seems to work. And in the end, that USB port worked just fine. And here we are, time to test the motherboard. I also gave it a good wash. So basically I'm submerging it in hot water with some dishwashing soap, and then I'll let it sit there for around 20 minutes for the soap to, do its thing. Give it a clean with some soft brushes, and it turned out beautifully. So this board looks absolutely brand new when you take a close look. But let's see if everything works. So without the CMOS battery, it's doing some sort of a first time detection of the CPU speed. So it's a Pentium 2 running at 350. So let's choose that option and then press F5, set up defaults, press yes, and then we're gonna boot into DOS. And here we go, it's looking good, but as I mentioned earlier, the PS2 keyboard port is not working. I don't have an optical drive, so let's go with this option. But at least the USB keyboard is working. Also, I don't have a sound card at the moment, but it is picking up the mouse. So let's try the PS2 mouse, and yeah, this is working fine. So PS2 mouse is working, USB ports are working, but the PS2 keyboard is not working. So guys, there you go. The ports have been replaced, but unfortunately the PS2 keyboard port is not working. If you spotted anything in the video, please let me know. Where did I go wrong? I do plan on revisiting this topic, and I also have another slot 1 motherboard with corroded ports, but on that one also the ISA slots are in bad condition, green discolored pins, so I'm not quite sure if this one is worth replacing an ISA slot. I think that's a heck of a job, lots of pins, lots of ground pins, but yeah, maybe that's a board to practice my skills on. I really appreciate all the feedback in the previous soldering videos. I don't have all the equipment ready just yet, but it's a process, it's a journey. I don't like to shell out on all the fancy, expensive stuff in one go. I do like to try and fail a little bit, gain experience, change this part, upgrade here, and then slowly level up. I feel like you don't always need the very best equipment. Sometimes It's better to work with something basic and sharpen your skills first. So there you go. That was my first go at repairing a slot 1 motherboard. Not quite the happy ending that I hoped it would be, but I gained a lot of experience and I'm in a stronger position to do the next repair. But I want to upgrade some of my equipment first. And yeah, as always, please leave your thoughts down below. You guys know so much. The past videos in the comments, yeah, they were absolutely beautiful. A lot of your tips match up with the online research that I found. And yeah, these old parts, the reality is many of them are failing, and I'm not going to turn into a repair channel, but I want to have enough skills to be able to, yeah, maybe not repair, but what's the word? Give those old parts some TLC, replacing caps, swapping out ports, that sort of stuff. Easy repairs that shouldn't be too difficult. But as it turns out, there's more skill required than I thought, so it's not as easy. And if you watch some of the repair YouTubers out there, they have a ton of skill and experience, and those people, they do make it look easy, but there's a learning curve to it. Still, if you're interested as well, I can highly recommend you trying some soldering. It's a heap of fun. Buy some solder kits, have a go, especially now over the holidays. It's a really fun hobby. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you soon with another one.